As you know, we have been using this resource here, which is called History of the Sabbath, or History of Sabbath Keeping in the Messianic Community throughout the centuries. And as we have been reading and going through it, there's been a great deal that we have been learning, great deal that we have been discovering, and I'm sure there's some things that you never knew with reference to the Shabbat and how the Shabbat has been practiced within the framework of the faith throughout the centuries. And I trust that you have been enjoying what you have been learning. Today, we're going to look at the 9th century Sabbath observance. Sometimes I want to say Shabbat, and I'm reading here and it says Sabbath. So I get tongue-tied a little bit. So forgive me for being tongue-tied. But we want to look at Sabbath observance through the centuries in the 9th century. Sabbath observance throughout the centuries in the 9th century. Want to look at Constantinople. Constantinople. The 9th century, this would be the 800s. And what we're going to note has to do with Photius, who was the patriarch of Constantinople, in counter to the synod that deposed Nicholas, thus accused papacy. Quote, against the canons, they induced the Bulgarians to fast on the Sabbath. Now, this particular statement has to do with something that was happening within the framework of the Church of the East, this particular one being in Constantinople. Now, the Orthodox Church in Constantinople, while it had some type of interaction with the Roman Catholic Church, held different opinions and views with reference to the Sabbath. And the Church of Rome, which was the church that spearheaded the changing of the Sabbath from the seventh day to Sunday, was doing its best to influence the churches of the East to also drop seventh day Sabbath keeping and to only keep the first day of the week, Sunday, as being regarded as the Sabbath. And what happened here has to do with the situation where there was an individual that was deposed, because what they were trying to do was to bring about a change in their canons. A canon is just a church governmental law. And they wanted to induce the Bulgarians to fast on the Sabbath. Now, why is that important? Okay, the Bulgarians lived in the region close by Constantinople, which was east of Rome. To fast on the Sabbath basically was to denigrate or to bring disrespect to the Shabbat, because the Shabbat is regarded as an oneg, a day of delight, a day of joy, a day of celebration. Now, does that mean that, say, if you're on a fast, you have to break your fast? I'm not going to say that. We know that our Messiah Yahshua fasted 40 days, so we know that that included the Shabbat. He had a specific purpose in mind in what he was doing. But when you're just doing your regular service unto the Almighty, the Shabbat is a day of joy. It is not a day that you specifically purpose to fast on. And this is what was trying to happen, or they were trying to do with the Bulgarians. And so this particular statement has to do with primarily showing that the church in Constantinople were Sabbath keepers. And we've already read some information about the fact that they were. Another thing we want to do, we want to look at the Aphagians. This particular statement says that Cardinal Hergenrother says that they stood in intimate relation with Emperor Michael II in 821 through 829 CE, and testifies that they observed the Sabbath. So here is another situation where the Athenians kept the Sabbath. We also want to note in India and Abyssinia, and this statement here is really a repeat of what has been noted in previous centuries. In India and Abyssinia, widespread and enduring was the observance of the seventh-day Sabbath among the believers of the Church of the East and the St. Thomas Christians of India. It was also maintained by the Abyssinians. So here in this statement, it tells us that the churches of the East, the St. Thomas Christians of India, which were called by the name Nazrani, and also the Abyssinians. Now the Abyssinians, those are the believers of what we would now regard as the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church. How many of you are familiar with the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church? You probably heard me mention that on many, many occasions. But in this particular time, the Abyssinians is what they were called. And so we see in these particular statements that in the 9th century, during the 800s, the Sabbath was kept, the Sabbath was revered, the Sabbath was practiced by the believers of the churches in the East. And so we bless the Almighty for this historical information that continues to confirm the keeping of the Shabbat. I hope that it helps to encourage you, that it helps to solidify your belief, your position, and your understanding of keeping the Shabbat, and regarding it as important and significant. Because for us who live in the Western world, we are surrounded by teaching that is greatly opposed to the keeping of the Shabbat. But it is always refreshing when we can hear information and have foundational historical truth to help solidify our belief and our practice. And with that, the Most High be praised.